Hello to all those resilient diabetics. I am Jay Sampat, and if you're new, welcome. This is where we turn ordinary, struggling diabetics into extraordinary, well-controlled diabetics. Today, we're going to discuss the glycemic index and why it completely failed me when I was first diagnosed as a diabetic. So, we got a couple questions. Is it now completely outdated, especially for those who have diabetes, and why? I will not only answer that question, but in the end, I will give you some life-changing tips on how I used and modified this tool to reestablish even greater control over my blood sugars. But also, if you're so inclined, we're going to leverage this plan to change your health and body composition too. And what I mean by that? Less fat and more muscle. For those of you who are new here, I was diagnosed a little over 5 years ago. And I am known as an LADA, which stands for latent autoimmune diabetes in adults. I'm basically a proud owner of a broken pancreas. And I did double check my warranty, and it said it's only good for 1 million grams of glucose. It's done. What are you going to do? So, I'm not only a diabetic like you, but I also have a University Bachelor of Science degree in nutrition dietetics. So obviously, I was able to use my vast knowledge in nutrition to help guide me through some of the most, probably the roughest, most tumultuous changes in my life. And even though I had my degree, once diagnosed as a diabetic, it was still a struggle. No one said it was going to be easy, and it hasn't been. Now, one of the first tools I used to help guide me through the initial phase of being diagnosed as a diabetic was the glycemic index. So that leads us to our question. What is it? And how can it help or hurt? So the glycemic index was conceived in the early 1980s by a scientist by the name of David Jenkins at the University of Toronto. And it was actually designed and developed as a tool for diabetics, especially type 1 diabetics. And they were studying basically impact of different types of carbs and how it influenced blood sugar levels. Now, what the glycemic does is it ranks carbohydrate foods based on how quickly they elevate sugar levels. High glycemic index, and I'm going to go back and forth between glycemic index and GI. So they're the same thing, GI and glycemic index. Now, these glycemic index value carbs that are high are quickly digested and absorbed, causing a spike in blood sugar levels. Low GI or low glycemic index carbs are basically slower digested, releasing glucose gradually into the bloodstream. And we'll put that in quotes for now, and you'll understand why in just a few minutes. The glycemic index foods are ranked based on how they compare to a standard. And that standard is glucose or white bread. The one thing we do need to get out of the way for you to understand, meats and fats do not have a GI, okay? Because they don't contain any carbs. So let's go over some of the factors that affect the glycemic index of food. And the one thing we need to understand is that these factors vary from one person to the next. And therein lies the very first problem. The fat and fiber content of food tends to lower the GI of food. The more cooked, the more processed the food, the higher the GI. Ripeness and storage time, we talked about the bananas. The more ripe a fruit or vegetable, the higher the GI. Processing. Juice has a higher GI than whole fruit. Mashed potatoes have a higher GI than whole baked potatoes. Cooking methods. How long the food is cooked. Al dente pasta has a lower GI than soft cooked pasta. Okay? GI values are generally divided into three categories. Low, which ranges from 1 to 55, medium, 56 to 69, and high GI foods such as the white bread and pure glucose, 70 and higher. So let's go over some food examples of low GI. That would include green vegetables, most fruits, raw carrots, kidney beans, chickpeas, lentils, and breakfast cereals. Well, bran breakfast cereals. Medium GI, sweet corn, bananas, raw pineapple, raisins, oats, breakfast cereals, multigrains, oat bran, and rye bread. Your high GIs, white rice, white bread, and potatoes. Interesting. So now we understand what the glycemic index is. We can look into its limitations. And this is where it all begins. And I will bring a study done by the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, and I will quote them. And it says, the glycemic index values appear to be an unreliable indicator even under highly standardized conditions, meaning they were fasted and tightly controlled. And in this study that they did, they wanted to test whether the glycemic index values are accurate and reproducible for all 63 of their participants. And they underwent 6 testing sessions over 12 weeks. Oh, that's beautiful. Okay, so we'll get a true idea of how the glycemic index varies from one person to the next. What they found out was that the average glycemic index value of white bread for the study was 62. Wait a minute. 62 is a medium glycemic index food. And deviations average about 15 points in either direction. So here's the funny part. White bread, which is supposed to be a high glycemic index based food which raises blood sugars quickly, didn't. It made it into all 3 categories depending on the person. For 22 of the volunteers, it was considered a low glycemic food. For 18, white bread had an intermediate glycemic index. And then for 23 volunteers, it was considered a high glycemic index food, between 70 and 103. What's worse, that within the same individual, the glycemic index values could differ by more than 60 points in between those trials. Today, many health organizations, including the American Dietetic Association, they don't quite endorse the glycemic index anymore as the reasons we just discussed. And their stance is basically this. One's overall diet is significantly more important than the individual foods, which is true. 2, a food's glycemic index can and will fluctuate. And that's highly dependent on A, what other foods are eaten with it, and B, how much is eaten. Take watermelon. It's got a GI of 72. Okay? But there's only 5 grams of carbs in 100 grams of watermelon. It's all water. So there's another big flaw. The GI doesn't take into account the carbohydrate density of the foods you've eaten. What I found out, and the very hard way, was that people with prediabetes or actual diabetes like myself, we have a very serious problem when we eat foods listed in the low and medium range as we do the high valued ones. Normal, non-diabetic people don't get damagingly high blood sugar spikes after eating high carbohydrate rich meals because they have healthy pancreases. And that secretes this huge burst of insulin as soon as they start eating. What were my major mistakes that you can learn from when I was first diagnosed? Now, I thought because certain foods like whole grain oatmeal and brown rice were low on the glycemic index, that they wouldn't affect my blood sugars as, say, white rice would. And boy, was I wrong. As I mentioned before in the videos on rice and juices, soda, rice, potatoes, bread, pasta all hit me with the same response like I was eating pure sugar. It was the total amount of glucose that really matters, not just the timing and the fiber content. So, just because it has more fiber, which is healthy, does not mean or equate to lower blood sugar values. That meant, for me in particular, even with those healthy fiber-rich carbs, I had to use more insulin. The more insulin I used, the worse my blood lipid values became. In other words, my cholesterol went up, my triglycerides went up, my LDL went up, my good carriers, HDL, went down. All because I was eating the quote-unquote healthier, higher fiber-rich foods in every meal. That's alarming. So if one followed the advice of eating certain healthy fiber foods, such as whole grain oats, and they use these modern charts, like the Food Guide Pyramid, the ones I'll show you right now, with serving sizes and foods recommended at every meal, 3 meals a day, my diabetes would become a progressive disease. And I hate to use the term diabetes is a progressive disease, because it is not. What do I mean by progressive? Based on bad advice, you now have to use more insulin than you need. Now your doctor's got to put you on different kinds of medications, more insulin, a third medication, a fourth medication, just to lower your blood sugars. That is not a good thing. When in reality, diabetes is a disease that can be controlled through the right diet for you and diet alone. Diabetes is a disease where carbohydrates are your main concern. How you respond to them is unique to you and to you alone. What did I do that improved my health and also helped radically change my body composition, like what I'm about to show you? And it's actually even better than before I was diagnosed. I did 2 things. 1, removed all starchy carbs, regardless of fiber content, to just 1 meal a day. And that was limited to very small amounts of rice, and on the days that I trained my major body parts, such as my back and my legs. That's just to restore glycogen or sugar levels inside the muscle. 2, all meals revolved around outside servings of cruciferous vegetables and green leafy vegetables, along with lean proteins. Now, those are not only very low glycemic index foods, but they require very little amounts of insulin. And most importantly, those foods are packed with vitamins and minerals and antioxidants for your health. So, as a diabetic, you want 2 things. 1, control blood sugars. But that's not our only main concern. Just as important is the amounts of insulin that you will need or has to be secreted by the body. The right amounts at the right times are necessary for your health, as I explained in the video, is insulin making you fat. But here's the kicker. The less insulin you need, the healthier you'll become as a diabetic. So, if you found this episode helpful, please hit those alerts, that gray bell on top of the screen, the subscribe button. And if you liked what you heard today, hit that like button. It is so super important for us new channels. The more you hit those alerts, the more YouTube promotes this channel, the more people get to see it. That's why I ask. In the comment section below, please feel free to tell us what kind of carbs in particular have you substituted in for your diet. Ones that keep your blood sugars stable and steady. I'd also like to know which carbs most think of as healthy have caused the greatest degree of trouble and spikes of blood sugars for you in the past. So, have a great day, a productive week, and we will see you soon.